feels like I have not recorded in a long time. And it has been a while. It feels like it's been a lot longer than it has been. It's been a couple weeks. I think right now, I'm actually recording this the night before it's going to air. This is the week after Thanksgiving. So, happy late Thanksgiving to everybody. Hope everyone had a fun holiday. Was able to sit and reflect, get some time off. I do want to go over a couple things really quick with the channel. So, as many of you know, there have been some stuff going on in the background, not just with Basically Biblical, but with On Fire Productions. And as a result of that, I am going to be changing stuff up a little bit with Basically Biblical. So right now, I'm going to be going from, we have 2 full-length episodes a week, and then we have shorts on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday every week. And then our full-length episodes are Tuesday, Thursday. So we've got stuff coming out 6 days a week. Now, there's going to be a change to that. Shorts will stay the same, but for our full-length stuff, it's going to cut down to 1 episode a week. I do think the episodes are going to end up being a little bit longer, so it's not going to be, it'll probably be a little less content per week, but it's not going to be anything major. But those will just be on Tuesdays. And then, as of right now, Thursdays are going to be open. I'm not going to have anything coming out on Thursdays, but I do have some stuff I'm currently working on with someone else, some other people actually, to do something that's going to be regularly on Thursdays. And once I have some more details, I'll be able to talk about that a little more freely. But it's going to be something different than Basically Biblical, and I think it's going to be something that a lot of people will enjoy and get benefit from. And I think it'll match well with Basically, or pair well with Basically Biblical. But that hopefully is coming up around the new year. Also, I'm going to have at the start of the year, there's going to be some content I've talked about a little bit already. It's going to be coming out. We've got some testimonies from people, and there's some crazy testimonies we have from people I've been able to interview and hear how God has moved in their life, and some stuff like that. And I think it's going to be really, really good to watch. I think a lot of people are going to get a lot of benefit from it. So those are just a couple quick updates, some housekeeping. I'll see if I remember how to do this. It's been a while. So we are talking today about Leviticus. We're continuing on with our Books of the Bible series. For this is one I think is important for people to see. This book I think is important for people to read. Now, Leviticus is, I've referred to it as this before too, but it's referred to fairly frequently as the through the Bible killer. Now, the reason for that is because people get really excited and really gung-ho on, I'm going to get through the Bible in a year, or I'm just going to get through the Bible cover to cover. I'm going to do from Genesis to Revelation, and they start. And Genesis is a big book, but to get through Genesis, there's a lot of action. There's a lot of just constant movement. You see God moving in these powerful ways and things like that. And that's all throughout Genesis. Then you get to Exodus. and it's a lot more of the same. You see God moving in power. You see, we've already talked about the plagues. Moses gets the Ten Commandments, wandering through the desert, and a lot of stuff that goes along with that. But it's really action-packed, and it's really just fun to read. Then you get to Leviticus, and you start having things like the different sacrifices that are required for different types of offering to atone for sin. Some requirements for priests and things like that. And admittedly, sorry, I'm still getting over this cold thingy, whatever it was I had. But admittedly, up until the last, let's say, a couple years, I didn't have a good appreciation of Leviticus. I was, like many other people, up until a couple years ago, I hadn't even read through Leviticus. I knew some scriptures in Leviticus, but I had not actually read through cover to cover. And I sat down to do it just because I thought, I say that the Bible is important. I say that we need to read it all, and I haven't actually read it all, so I need to actually read it all. And so I sat down and I read through Leviticus, and it was difficult to read through the first time. Once I went back to it again, and the reason I went back to it again is because I started seeing some stuff about proper understanding of what Leviticus was, and the proper way to read it and understand what's going on there. Seeing that, and we'll get into that here shortly, but seeing that and then thinking, okay, I want to go back and read this in the proper mindset of really being able to look and understand what's going on here. And then going back and reading through it, it is now probably, I'd say the book that I have one of the, I'm trying to think of the correct terminology. I would say I have one of the most emotional reactions to the book of Leviticus. Having a proper understanding of what it is actually getting to and the significance of it and what it's pointing to and things like that. Which, like I said, we'll get into in this episode. But there's a lot. And we will dive right in. So, the book of Leviticus, similar to Genesis and Exodus, Leviticus was written by Moses. It is the third book of what we call the Pentateuch. It was written around the same time as the others, 1400s BC. It was written to the wandering Israelites and future generations. Now, rather than the book of Leviticus, it takes a little bit of a different approach. We kind of see the shift in narrative in Exodus a little bit, but we see it even more so in Leviticus. So Genesis and Exodus, a lot of it is it's historical telling of things that happened. Whereas Leviticus, we kind of start getting into more, you could say, prescriptive. It's God laying out His rules for the Israelites. So quick synopsis of the book of Leviticus. The Israelites had been captives in Egypt for 400 years. While there, their concept of God had been distorted by the pagan Egyptians. The purpose of Leviticus is to provide instruction and laws to God or to guide a sinful yet redeemed people in their relationship with the holy God. There is an emphasis in Leviticus of the need of personal holiness in response to a holy God. Sin must be atoned for through the offering of proper sacrifices. Leviticus serves as a bridge between Exodus and Numbers, establishing the framework of the Israelites' spiritual journey and their covenantal relationship with God as they dwell in His presence. So, we talked about in Exodus, the Israelites had been in captivity for 400 years. Now, during this time, they didn't hear from God. He was quiet. From the time of Joseph's death to the time of Moses being brought up, pretty much anyone who was alive had not lived in a time where they were actually being led by God, or they were hearing God. God was speaking to them. They had been enslaved, and so there's a lot of individuals in the Israelite camp who probably believe that maybe not that their God didn't really exist, but definitely I'd say they didn't think His power was real, or He wasn't as powerful as some of the other gods, pagan gods that they had seen and were aware of in the area. And so that's when we see, in Exodus, we see the plagues. All of the plagues specifically deal with an Egyptian god. And so part of it was to show the Egyptians, hey, our God has the power over your gods. But also, I think part of it was to show the Israelites, hey, our God is real, and our God has power, and He is going to rescue us from this. We are His chosen people, and affirming the stories of old that they had. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was still around, was still good, still powerful, and still commanded respect, holiness. Now, like I said, Leviticus really sets up this framework of holiness to God. God is holy. In order to be around God, we have to be holy. And it's not so much about our actions and how we live and things like that. That is definitely part of it. But it's a lot more of showing, and we see this later on in the New Testament, but we see this, the law was not made to show us how to get to heaven. The law was made to show us that we cannot be good enough. Then, after that, we start getting into this idea of atonement and blood sacrifice. And there is a punishment for sin. And that is not even really a punishment. There is a price that has to be paid. I think Paul says it really well in the New Testament, but the wages of sin is death. So it's not something that is unfairly being pushed on people. You're actively participating in sin. It's like a job. You're choosing. I choose to go to work for the company that I work for, and knowing that I'm going to get paid a salary. So sin, we need to view it as this is a thing that we are choosing to interact with and to act on this, and we will be paid for that. And the wage in which we are paid is death. There is death that comes with sin. And because God is holy, and we start seeing this holiness framework being set up in Leviticus, but because God is holy, really, truly, completely holy, it is not possible for sin to exist in his presence. And we've talked about this a little bit too. This is kind of where the, not so much here in the Old Testament, but we see this pop up in the New Testament, but this idea of hell. It's not that God sends people to hell. God doesn't send anyone to hell. God doesn't force anyone to go and be in hell for eternity or anything like that. But rather, God gives you what you choose. And if you choose sin, if you choose not to accept the sacrifice of Jesus, then you're choosing separation from God. And God is going to allow you to have that choice. And that is what hell is. It is a complete separation from God. It's not... I feel like the terminology of punishment is incorrect because it gives this idea that God's sitting up there and he's like, oh, you were bad, so I'm going to do this. Like, everyone's bad. And rather than it being hell as a punishment for your wickedness and evil, it is honoring the choice that you have made, allowing free will. Now that is ultimate, and there's some debate on this too, as far as what does hell actually look like, and what's it going to be like, and things like that. The Bible's not 100% clear. I think you can there's a few different camps, but that's neither here nor there for this topic. But this whole idea of holiness and being able to be in the presence of God really starts to take shape here in Leviticus. I lost my place. Oh, and with the atonement that has to happen. So we see as we read through Leviticus, there are different sacrifices that have to be made for different offerings or to atone for different sins, things like this. And what we see is some of this is you'll hear talk of grain offerings and things like that, which are a sacrifice. It's you giving something up. But I think the one that really starts to hit home, and really for the Israelites, it would have shown them the severity of their sin. It wasn't just God set up this rule, and so now you have to follow it. And if you don't, okay, then you have to pay some money, and then you're good. No, to cover sin, someone has to die. Something has to die. Period. And so that's what they actually saw, was to atone for the sin that they would commit or their family would commit. An animal would actually have to die. That was the only way to cover sin. And it wasn't perfect, because ultimately that's why Jesus came. But Jesus came to be that sacrifice for us, and I think this is where you can kind of get into it as far as reading this as the proper way to read Leviticus is when you see the sacrifices that have to be made. You see that understanding that it's not a bloodthirsty God that wants these animals to die. It's not anything like that, but rather it is a God that's trying to make a way for us to be with him. A God that's trying to provide a door that we can step through to partake of eternity with him in his perfect presence and his holiness and his goodness. and that doorway, it's costly to get through. It costs life, and that's why Jesus making that sacrifice, we're able to partake in what he did, because he did come and he did live a sinless life, and then he paid that ultimate punishment of physical death, spiritual death. He went to hell, came back, he defeated death, defeated the grave, and because he paid that payment when he didn't have to, we are now able to partake in that, and we are now able to enter into heaven because of the sacrifice that Jesus made. So reading through Leviticus with that in mind, for me, really changed how I was reading it, and changed just the impact of it. It hits way different now. It's not a boring book that I have to get through. It's a book that it like genuinely moves me to read it, thinking about what it actually is, what the implications really are. Foreshadowing. So foreshadowing for the book of Leviticus. Honestly, most of the book of Leviticus is seemingly unending foreshadowing. So rather than pulling out a couple points, what I would encourage you to do is to read through the book on your own, start to finish. While doing so, keep in mind Jesus and the sacrifice that he was for us, the true perfect lamb whose blood was shed to cover a multitude of sins for the world. And I really believe reading through that way, it will change how you read the book of Leviticus. Practical application. So, here I kind of touched on this already. I got a little blurb here I'll read, and then I'll kind of elaborate. A truly holy God cannot tolerate blatant, unashamed sin in his people, and his holiness requires him to punish that sin. We need to make sure we do not make light of sin or God's loathing of it. Leviticus is all about substitution. Blood had to be spilled to atone for sin. And eventually, that would lead to the ultimate substitution in the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross, and his subsequent defeating death, resurrection, and ascension back into heaven. Now, talked about that a little bit. This whole idea that Leviticus is about the substitution of, we see it literally in Leviticus with animals being sacrificed to atone, to pay the price of the death that should had to have been paid by the Israelites. The animals would stand in that gap. They would take the sin on, and then they would die. And this was temporary. This is flawed. It was not perfect. I'm not saying that God's plan was not perfect. Like I said, that the law was given to show that we are not good enough, that we cannot measure up. Jesus' coming was not plan B. Jesus' coming was plan A. We see that in the New Testament when it talks about Jesus was the lamb that was slain before the foundations of the earth. It was already known that Jesus was going to have to make that sacrifice. He was going to have to come in bodily form. He was going to have to willingly go to the cross, knowing at any moment he could have stopped it. At any moment he could have ended all of it, not had to do it, just been done. But he didn't. That's like I said, reading Leviticus in light of this is, I think, really changes how you see it. I've got a couple prominent stories in Leviticus that I forgot to pull up. Okay, the first one I'm not going to read just because there's a lot. But it's Leviticus chapter 8. It would be the consecration of Aaron and his sons. And normally I pull my Bible up, but I'm actually missing my Bible. We went to Illinois 2 weeks ago. And I know I didn't leave it up there, but I have no idea where it's at now. So I'm back to my old Bible, which I don't like as much, but it's still a good translation. It's just not my ESV or my NASB. So Leviticus 8 is the consecration of Aaron and his sons. This is just setting apart Aaron and his lineage as the ones that will be the priests for God. Next, let's look at Leviticus 10 verses. I've got 1 through 7 down. Now, Nadab and Abihu. Side note: if you're watching this and you're looking for children's names, Nadab and Abihu probably good to stay away from. You'll see why here in a second. The sons of Aaron each took his censer and put fire in it and laid incense on it and offered unauthorized fire before the Lord, which he had not commanded them. And fire came out from before the Lord and consumed them, and they died before the Lord. Then Moses said to Aaron, "This is what the Lord has said. Among those who are near me, I will be sanctified, and before all the people I will be glorified." And Aaron held his peace. And Moses called Mishael and Elzaphan, sons of Uzziel, the uncle of Aaron, and said to them, "Come near, carry your brothers away from the front of the sanctuary and out of the camp." So they came near and carried them in their coats out of the camp, as Moses had said. And Moses said to Aaron and Eleazar and Lathamar, his sons, "Do not let the hair of your heads hang loose, and do not tear your clothes, lest you die. The wrath come upon all the congregation, but let your brothers, the whole house of Israel, bewail the burning that the Lord has kindled. And do not go outside the entrance of the tent of meeting, lest you die. For the anointing oil of the Lord is upon you." And they did according to the word of Moses. So, this at first glance, reading through, might seem kind of strange, but the purpose in this goes to show the importance, the significance of what God had instituted. These weren't just simple rules. These weren't just like, God saying, "Well, I kind of prefer this, but ultimately it's whatever you want to do," and anything like that. God is setting this apart. God is setting his people apart from the nations, from the other pagan gods. He's showing that he is serious about these rules, that they need to be followed. And so with this, we see 2 of Aaron's sons die, and you can go through and read like what they were supposed to do. They didn't follow what they were supposed to follow, and we see this. Now there is a difference. Before I go into this next part, there's a difference between Old Testament and New Testament, and it's not that God is different; it's the covenant that we have with God is different. But this goes to show the importance of following God's rules, God's law. It's not just a suggestion. There is life and death in the rules. I would say even if if you are if you're not a Christian, you have no belief whatsoever in God, and you follow God's commands, you follow what the Bible says to do, your life here on earth is going to be better. Now, eternity is not, but you will live a good life here on earth. You will be happy. Generally speaking, you will avoid a lot of heartache and a lot of misery. You will generally be, I'd say, more happy and more well off than most people. So that is something that we see now, even with the rules and laws and things that God has in place. We see even in the New Testament, Ananias and Sapphira, they were under the new covenant, and they didn't listen to, or they grieved the Holy Spirit. They lied to the Holy Spirit, and they got struck down dead where they stood in the middle of basically a church service. It's crazy to think about the fact that that's the covenant that we're under. There's no difference between then and now. So it shows the importance of the rules that God implements. It's not just hey, this is a preference. We need to take it seriously. We need to view it seriously, because there is a real payment that is necessary for sin, and that is death. That's just how it is. Famous verses in Leviticus. First one is Leviticus 17:11. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it for you on the altar to make atonement for your souls. For this is the blood that makes atonement by the life. Again, this is just talking about that idea of atonement, and blood has to be spilt. There has to be a payment of blood to atone for sin. Another prominent verse, Leviticus 19:18. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. This is as God's giving them different things to do. Frequently you'll see this language of there'll be an instruction and then I am the Lord. And this is God reminding them, I am. I am. So those are just prominent verses. Again, Leviticus is kind of hard to single out, especially now. You really need to read the book in its entirety. All books of the Bible you need to read through, but I would say, especially now after having a proper understanding of it, you need to read it through in its entirety. So miscellaneous things about the book of Leviticus. Most of the book of Leviticus are laws that kept the Israelite people safe, healthy, and peaceful. Now there is some, I think there's multiple purposes behind some of these laws. One we see frequently, Jews are not allowed to eat pork. Well, part of that is there's a lot of really nasty things that can happen if pork is not cooked thoroughly. You have that with any raw meat, but pork seems to be particularly bad. So I think part of it was God was decreasing the risk of some of the stuff happening. I think part of it was that was a common food for the people around there, the pagan people. And so if Israelites weren't allowed to eat what was common among these pagans, there's a lot smaller chance that they're going to be intermingling and things like that. So they would stay set apart. There could be plenty of other reasons too. These are just kind of some looking at them in a more practical way. And we'll get into, there's another one here that I think is going to surprise some people. I'll get to, I think it's one of the last ones. So there are many things that were deemed unclean, such as specific animals, coming into contact with dead bodies, etc. God's purpose was to protect people from germs and unhealthy living. Like I said, there could be other reasons as well, but I do think at least a part of it was to set God's people aside and to help them to prosper, to live, to avoid unnecessary contaminations. We see, Leviticus has rules as far as like mold in a house. And it's kind of crazy looking at the instructions and rules and things like that are there compared to what we now know scientifically and the medical field and stuff like that. Like there are the Black Plague, a lot of people familiar with, that did not have near the effect on Jewish communities as it did most of the rest of Europe. And the reason why is because of these Levitical laws that they had, that they were honoring, that they were sticking to. Making sure that they're relieving themselves away from where they sleep and eat and stuff like that. Getting rid of dead bodies, don't just leave them lying around, don't touch them, or if you do, you're unclean for a certain amount of time, and you would have these rituals that you'd have to go through to make yourself clean again, and like it was actually like sanitation stuff. There's rules about like mold in houses and things like that. We can even see some of these in our world now. Like I said, looking at the medical field and some of the rules and stuff that were there for the Israelites. Another part of this is circumcision. One of the biggest factors in lowering the percentage chance of a woman contracting cervical cancer is her partner being circumcised. Like, that seems crazy to think about that would have an effect, and then looking at that's what God chose to have as the mark of his covenant with Abraham. So it's not a definitive thing, but I think it's definitely interesting to see the things that God set aside as to set his people apart. There was actual, what we're able to see now, scientific benefits, medical benefits to the rules that were in place by God back then. So, hey everybody, appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to watch or listen. Don't forget to like and subscribe and turn the bell notifications on so you always see when we come out with new content, because we come out with new content every single week, 2 videos a week and shorts throughout the week, as well as different random stuff we'll put on social media. We also have, with Basically Biblical, a new company we are starting, On Fire Productions. You can check them out on Instagram. A lot of really awesome content that's going to be coming out with them. Music, kids content, movies, TV shows, anything that you can think of, we're going to get into it, and it's all going to be faith-based. But you can go check them out on different social medias. In the meantime, there will be a video up here that we think that you will probably like, as well as a playlist down here that should be more content that you will enjoy. So thanks. God bless.